Tushangilie Kenya, taifa letu tukufu, Kenya tunayoipenda.
We are so excited to see all of you gracing and honoring our invitation. I would like us to begin our program. It is time to start. We were supposed to start at 9. It is 9:02. So I would like to invite all of us to arise so that we sing the national anthem in Swahili, the Kenyan national anthem in Swahili, and will we sing it also the East African? So we shall do both. We'll be seated. Thanks very much. Once again, I would like to, on behalf of the Elections Observation Group, take this opportunity to welcome everyone, those who are here present in this hotel, and those who are following us virtually, to this day that we launch our report on citizen assessment of the 2022 electoral processes. We'll be able to go into details what the report is about. So feel most welcome, everyone. We won't go into details of introducing everyone, but allow me to recognize and single out a few representatives. I'll begin by recognizing the presence of our advisory and peace panel members. Regina Opondo, you could just stand and wave. Regina Opondo is a member of ELOG Advisory and Peace Panel and the immediate chair of ELOG. Karibu, Regina. I would also like to introduce and recognize the presence of the ELOG Steering Committee members. ELOG Steering Committee members. Yes. Sorry, before I go there, I forgot to mention Eric. Eric Ngodi, please forgive me for not doing that. Eric is also a member of ELOG Advisory and Peace Panel, but also sits as the chair of the board of United Disabled Persons of Kenya. Eric, karibu. Then I move to the second organ for ELOG, which is the steering committee. We have representations here. I'll introduce Susie Ibutu, who sits at NCCK. Then I will introduce Eusebius Atamalo, who is the head of department for CJPD, KCCB. Then I will also introduce Salat from SUPCHEM, a member of the steering committee for ELOG. Then we also are represented by our thematic member, Cliff. You can say hi to the group. Thanks. Those are the ELOG leadership present in the room. We are receiving more as they come. I would also like to also recognize the presence of our strategic partners, Dennis Omondi, who is the head of NDI Kenya. You can wave to the people. And also introduce Lee Fung. You just rise and say hi to everyone from OHCR. And then we have our partners from, no, I forgot also, let me say that our consultants before I move to USAID, Dr. Fred Owaka, and then Francis Owaka, and then Kathleen. Those are the consultants that help us put this report into the format that you will see shortly. I would also like to recognize our independent officers here. We have Ombudsman, represented by the Vice Chairperson, Washington Sati. You could say hi to everyone. Then also the Deputy CEO of IEBC, Madam Ruth Kulundu. I'd also like to recognize the presence of Fred Owegi, who is from USAID, who has made this report possible through the support that they extend to us. If I've not mentioned your name for one reason or the other, feel most welcome to this event. I would like then to invite Susie Ibutu to give welcoming and opening remarks to this forum. Karibu, Susie. So Susie sits in ELOG, as I said, as a member of the steering committee, but also as the chief of party for the Mulika initiative, which supports this initiative. Karibu, Susie.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Indeed, it's a good morning, and we are delighted that we've come this journey as ELOG, and we are here, done a lot of work over the last almost 2 years, and now we are here. So allow me to just quickly welcome each one of us and say that as the family of ELOG, we are happy and delighted that you've been able to join us. And we welcome you to this meeting today. And as ELOG, as I've mentioned, we are glad that you have been able to find time to be with us and to be in this occasion. We also want to thank the support that we have received from USAID. The arrangement that we have had is that NCCK, leading a team of about 6 organizations, were able to engage in the electoral process, and ELOG did the components that focused on general observation, PVT, and other areas, including media monitoring, and we are glad that we are here. As a country, we have made impressive and monumental strides in our electoral and democratic process, especially after the enactment of the new constitution. I don't know whether it's new anymore, but after the constitution 2010. Indeed, Kenya has been hailed as a beacon of electoral democracy in the region. And according to the ELOG reports and experts' opinion on the same, Kenya's elections have gradually improved with every election since 2013, with successive elections being conducted better than the previous ones. And I think we are all Kenyans and we can attest to this. However, Kenya's history of elections has also documented the bad and the ugly aspects, notably the disputed electoral and especially presidential outcome and the emotive elections period that we always experience. So there is the good part. We have improved a lot as a country, but there are areas, of course, we have experienced challenges, and these are areas we continue to look at as friends, as families, as Kenyans. After its observation mission for the 2022 electoral process, ELOG produced and published its final observation report, and this was titled From the Ballot to the Portal, which detailed findings and recommendations on the conduct of the 2022 election process, and also produced another report, which we titled Catalyzing Change, in partnership with the CSOs and Technical Working Group on Elections and the Uchaguzi Platform. And I hope you have had time, or you will have time to look at these reports, because they have some quite insights that are helpful as a country as we move on. These reports consolidated major findings and recommendations from all the domestic observers, arising from the various observation missions and engagement during the 2022 electoral process. And as part of, or as the follow-up of these recommendations, and arising from these reports, ELOG then instituted the citizen assessment of the 2022 electoral process, with the main aim of assessing whether the 2022 electoral process met citizens' expectations. So the process that the report will be receiving has been looking at what are the views of Kenyans in view of where we have come from. So it is important to reiterate the fundamental principles that elections are people-driven processes, and for any of the election process to have been anchored, to be credible, they have to be anchored on the ability to meet the aspirations of the people as prescribed in the constitutions and other enabling legislation. Specifically, you'll notice that this assessment sought to assess the level of citizens' engagement in the 2022 electoral process, assess the level of compliance to the electoral rigor framework for the purpose of the 2022 electoral process. It also assesses the level of effectiveness of performance of key agencies in the 2022 electoral process, and some of them are here. And it also identifies key reforms, administrative, institutional, policy, rigor, for consideration as we move forward. And one of the things, even as we know where the country is with the consultation process that is going on, or the bipartisan talks, We, of course, as a country, are expecting to experience various reforms as we move towards the 2027 now electoral cycle. And some of these recommendations will be useful for the various organs, either parliament or other relevant actors, and for purposes of improving our electoral process as we move forward, and especially as we begin and as we enter the 2027 electoral cycle. So today we launch the final product of this engagement, and as you will see shortly from the highlights of these findings, there's a growing concern from citizens that democratic elections are on trial, with citizens increasingly becoming indifferent, maybe a bit more apathetic to our elections. This report exposes citizens' views on voter registration, voter education, performance of key electoral institutions, electoral legal regime that govern our elections, and suggests some practical solutions or recommendations for improving our systems and improving our processes. The reforms proposed herein are therefore legal, policy, administrative, and political in nature. And as we know, the country is slowly drifting to normalcy after the very emotive process that we went through. A bit of course, there were divisions during the electoral process, but as we get into settling down, this I think is the opportune time for us as a country to begin then engaging with the electoral reforms. And of course, it is to thank ELOG very much for the process that they have been able to go through, because this gives us a stepping stone as we engage in these processes. And therefore, ELOG recognizes that the institutions that you represent, and the reason that we are here, is that because you have a stake in all this process, and that it is important to share these recommendations, and so that as a country, as the civil society and other friends that are in this room, we can move forward into actualizing some of the reforms that are suggested in this process. So thank you very much, good friends. Karibuni sana, and may God bless us as we go through this process. Thank you.
I take this opportunity, therefore, to welcome Frederick Owegi, who is from USAID. He will say something about himself and a few words as we launch this report today. Karibu Bwana Fred.
My name is Fred Owegi, like you have heard. I work with USAID, Kenya, and East Africa. More specifically, I work in the Office of Democratic Governance, Peace and Security, and that is the technical office of USAID through which support to Kenya's elections has been happening. So it's my pleasure to be here with you this morning. The USAID, Kenya, and East Africa is pleased to partner with ELOG, and also we wish to congratulate ELOG on the successful completion of the citizen assessment of the 2022 elections process. Congratulations, ELOG. We are proud of the achievement you have made. USAID's, please. USAID's partnership with ELOG takes place under the Mulika initiative, which Madam Susie Ibutu has just spoken about. This initiative is led by the National Council of Churches of Kenya, NCCK, and it involves 5 other partners. These are the Catholic Justice and Peace Commission, which is represented here this morning. The Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims, SUPKEM, is also represented here. The Independent Legal and Medical Unit, IMLU, I believe they are also represented here, as well as the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. So these are the members, or rather the partners, who are involved in the Mulika initiative. Through this particular initiative, USAID, Kenya, and East Africa is providing support for peaceful and accountable democratic processes for a cohesive Kenya. Among other objectives, this initiative aims to build the capacity of citizens to detect and to deter electoral fraud in Kenya's electoral and democratic processes. So that's the specific objective of the Mulika initiative. Now, ELOG is the main implementer of this component of the Mulika initiative. The assessment, so this is the context in which ELOG instituted the assessment that is being launched this morning. Now, the objectives of that assessment and the goals of that assessment have been very well articulated by Susie, so I'm not going to go into all of that. But I'm just going to mention that, like all of you, we at USAID are keen to learn the findings of ELOG's assessment. We look forward to discussing these findings with all of you and all other key actors who may not be present in this room. More importantly, we look forward to the consensus that I hope is going to arise around which how the findings of the study can contribute, one, to the ongoing discourse around reforms to Kenya's electoral processes, and two, to the programmatic support by USAID and by all other supporters or donors or key contributors towards strengthening the country's democratic governance arrangements, including public participation and citizen engagement. So I wish to thank all of you, and I wish to take this opportunity to wish you all productive deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fred, and once again, thank you for the support that USAID has continued to extend to ELOG since our inception in 2010. Now, we move to the second and a very brief part of our presentation. We have invited Thomas to make a few presentations on some study that he did. As you can see from your program, it's called Local Perceptions and Media Representations on Election Observation in Africa and the Proliferation of Citizen Observer Groups in Kenya 2022 elections. Just key highlights, so we'll give him a few minutes to just share those insights, then we move into the ELOG report. Welcome, Tom.
Yeah, my name's Tom Maloney, lecturer in African Studies at the Centre of African Studies, University of Edinburgh. It's good to be back in Nairobi. I got him back in last night. I'm told it's a few minutes. It's until what time? Until 10:15. Yeah, 10:15. Okay, so it's a few more minutes. I'm a bit pressed for time here. It's two presentations. And Marcus is just getting one up on the screen now. The first presentation is on local perceptions and media representation of election observation in Africa. And it's based on a 3-year project funded by UK, the UK Economic and Social Research Council, on election observation in Kenya, Zambia, and the Gambia. And it's now in the third and final year. We covered the elections in those countries as they took place. Now, I'll just talk about the project briefly in a nutshell, as I've already started on, a little bit on the methodology. I won't go into too much detail on that. And then I'll look at local perceptions and then on media representations. The interest in local perceptions is because a fair bit of research, a lot of research has been done on elections in Africa, not so much on election observation, and none at all on what citizens in host countries think of election observers, whether they're domestic or citizen observers, or whether they're regional or international observers. So we wanted to look at that. It's just not looked at in the academic literature, nor it turns out amongst practitioners. And also media representation, how the information produced by election observation missions circulates in the media, whether that's traditional or social media. Yeah, as I said, 2 phases. One in the lead up to the election, also covering election day and on to about 10 days afterwards. And then phase 2, we came back in each country 3 months later. We conducted semi-structured interviews in depth with what we're referring to here as non-elite informants, ordinary wananchi. 520 in total. We tried to get we achieved a gender balance and age spread as well into 3 categories, youth, middle-aged, and old. This, incidentally, I can give the URL. It's available online, so you don't have to take copious notes. There's fairly brief documents on these giving the highlights. And we asked, we conducted this in the language favored by the informants. In this case, in Kenya, in some cases it's Swahili, in many cases it was English, but also it might be, depending on where we were, in local vernaculars as well, with assistance, including my colleague Rachel Makoha, who is here from Technical University of Kenya. In phase 1, we tended to look at the historical experiences, so citizens' understanding or knowledge of the historical experiences of election observation, who they think should be conducting observation, and what they think observers should be doing. And in phase 2, the election having taken place about around 3 months prior, what their evaluations were of election observation. The Gambia we had 4 study sites. In Kenya we had 6. For the study sites, we aimed to get 2 areas that were perceived pro-government and 2 areas that were perceived pro-opposition. In Kenya, with the 2022 elections, that was more difficult to know. We had some idea, of course, but there were areas that were said to be swing or very tight, or where it was too close to call. So actually in Kenya, we looked at 6 areas. And of those 2 areas, or of the 3 areas, we chose rural areas and urban areas as well. And in Kenya, we covered then Wajir, which was perceived, remember we didn't know what the outcome was going to be, as Azimio, Nyeri, which was rural, Nyeri for urban and rural, which was perceived, Kenya Kwanza, Samburu rural, Azimio, Kisumu urban, Azimio, Uasin Gishu rural, Kenya Kwanza, perceived, and Nakuru urban, Kenya Kwanza, again perceived. Next slide, please. Also, we conducted in-depth structured interviews with elite informants, in this case, exclusively just about in Nairobi, 160 in total. And on that, in the first phase, we spoke to regional and international observers. This is in the lead up to the election, media as well, academics, some citizen observers. In the second phase, after the election, 3 months, we got to speak to, actually in the case of Kenya, we didn't get great access to IBC formally, citizen observers, political parties and party agents, people who tend to be very busy around the time that we were conducting the first phase of research. Next slide, please. Thanks. We also conducted a media tracker, I won't go into that, and we went to press conferences as well for as many as we could. So I'm going to go over now what are the initial findings. Actually, they are the finalized findings for both presentations. First, I'm going to go to local perceptions. So this was a relief for us that citizens believe that it's important that elections are observed by dedicated observers. That was good news. Next slide. And there's an overwhelming feeling that citizens felt that observation does help the citizens of the countries in which observation is taking place. Our approach to observation here is both citizen observers, regional and international as well. Yeah. Intentionally, to begin with, methodologically, we just referred to observers rather than had any leading questions about international or citizen observers. My guess is that with the presence of some Wazungu they would be thinking that maybe we're talking about international, but there were times where local researchers were there without myself and my colleague Rob. Equally, people would still think we're talking about largely about international observers, interestingly. Next slide. That's not to say that knowledge of election observation was very good. I think it's good to say citizen knowledge of election observation is pretty poor. Pretty poor, it's very poor. And that election observers are often conflated with other actors in the electoral environment. They might think that election observers are, that IEBC, for example, conducts election observation, and other actors as well. Interestingly, very few people could mention any specific observation groups at all, whether in Kenya it's ELOG or it's the EU or any others. Very, very few could actually name an observer, an observation group. And they had difficulty identifying observers, say, in polling stations. Next. Yeah, of the statements, preliminary statements, or other outputs from observation groups, whether that's citizen or international groups, very little of that information reaches citizens. We work in this environment, so we are, it's our day-to-day work, and we become consumed in elections and election observation. But it doesn't mean that those reports that we diligently write, or whether it's the preliminary statements or other media that we put out there, actually reaches people, whether this is urban or rural areas. There we go, less than a quarter actually hear any news about observers at all. And as you might imagine, TV and radio are the most common mediums that people get knowledge about observers on. Yeah, people are generally unaware of where to find information or the reports that come out from observation groups. Nevertheless, they say that they wish to hear more. Part of me suspects that people say that because it's a nice thing to say. Nevertheless, this is what people are saying. Yes, we want to hear more about election observers. The question, I suppose, and we get onto that, is how might that be achieved or realized? So, since people know so little about election observation, it's very difficult for them then to assess election observation. Those who feel that they can have something to say about election observers, can speak with some confidence, generally are satisfied with the job of election observers, regardless of where those observers are from. And what's very interesting is, and Kenya's probably the best pointing case here from the 2017 elections, where there was a lot was stirred up about particular international groups in the media and their performance, and what some former heads of state and former foreign ministers from various countries said or were reported to have said, or heads of mission. So some controversy from 2017, which was very much on social media at the time amongst pointedly elites. This narrative hasn't trickled down at all. Of all of those people we spoke to in all 6 of the locations, urban and rural, we spoke to in Kenya, only one person mentioned issues from 2017 and election observers. Yeah, so generally, if people's satisfaction lies with their satisfaction of the outcome, their satisfaction with election observation lies with their satisfaction of the outcome. So if there's an area where there's a, frankly, where their often presidential candidate lost, they feel, well, observers didn't do a good job. If their presidential candidate won, they're like, yeah, observers did a great job. So it's quite politically aligned, those perceptions. But remember, those perceptions, in the main, are fairly ill-informed. Yeah, next slide. Thanks, Marcus. People believe that observers can intervene in the process. I imagine nearly everyone here has acted as an observer, whether that's in this country or overseas. I have two in this country as well in 2013 and 2017. Initially with the Carter Center in 2013 in Kilifi and Kwale, and in 2017 in Uasin Gishu and other parts of Rift with the European Union. And we don't interfere in the electoral process. We, as observers, we observe. We all know that, but people believe that observers can, and that might it might be an indication as to why they feel observers didn't do a good job, because if they're aggrieved or there's allegations of fraud or something like that, people might think, well, why didn't the observers do anything about it? As we know, it's not the observer's position to be doing that. Slightly different, say, in Zambia with some observers and the terminology of observation as opposed to monitors. And they think that they should focus on voting and counting. So I'd imagine that's because that's most of what they see of observers is around E-Day itself. What they want is often different from the common practices of observers. They want observers to inform them very clearly on who won the election. We might not see this, or observers might not see this, you may not see this as your mandate, but this is what is expected or what people want. They're like, well, it's kind of unclear, you know? We would like you to say who won the election. And also whether the election was fair or not. The phrase that would so often come up, I'm sure you're very familiar with, and it's very much in the language of election observation in the media, is those dreaded words free and fair, which cover perhaps a multitude of sins, and which we'll know is not a terminology that many credible observation groups use. But they want that free and fair. One back, please. Thanks. And they want to hear immediately after the results are announced what observers have to say. Thanks. Which observers often strive to achieve, but whether that actually reaches people is another question. This clear verdict that they want to hear, when we asked about, well, what happens if there's potential for a risk of violence, in what observers say? Do you want them really to call things out very clearly? And that softens. People are a little wary of, or are aware, rather, of the implications of what speaking very boldly could do to safety and security of, frankly, the nation or areas of the nation. So people are okay if that language is softened a bit. I'm speaking here in broad terms because I'm generalizing a 3-year project, speaking to a lot of informants in a lot of countries. If you look at the study, you'll see some specifics, but certainly those countries that have witnessed, experienced post-electoral violence, not least this country, are aware of its effects, and that language can be quite inflammatory or can be taken the wrong way at times. They have strong views on who should be conducting election observation. This is an interesting one. The Gambia is different, very different from Kenya. There's a few reasons that might be the case with the Gambia, but Kenya, there's a strong wish for international observers to be involved relative to citizen and regional observers. A combination, though, is quite strong. People often say, well, it's nice to get, the different opinions as well. Next, please. Okay, now we go on to media representations. The media, we spoke to we had really good access to the media, I must say. In fact, across the study, including in this country, our access to ordinary wananchi, who we approached, that depended in some areas that prior to the election people were sometimes wary, thought that we were pollsters, as much as we said that we weren't. But generally, our access was very good, not least with the media, the likes of yourself as well, when we asked for your time. And the media generally very positive towards observation. We certainly get a sense from the research that both the media and observation missions could do more to raise the profile of election observation. And this is discussions my colleague and I have been having with various groups. And we're happy to continue this conversation here as well. We must remember that the media plans to cover elections. And what sells, and often what owns the media, is politics, yeah? And election observation, which is our bread and butter, or for many of us, is not so much the media's interest. It's the elections itself, and observation is very secondary to that. Next slide. The reporting on election observations normally ad hoc. I have a sense with some missions, some regional missions in particular, some international missions, that they have, they use their access to the media in a way that raises their profile, but often quite last minute, and really to show that the mission is there. It often doesn't give a lot of substantive information, but that's something that some observation groups seek to sort of limit their information in the lead up to the election, to not interfere with the process. So it's a fine line that they have to walk. Often those reporters who are covering observation lack any experience of, I would say observation, but quite often of elections. Journalists, this is me getting older, journalists seem to be getting younger, but particularly in the Gambia, for example, journalists are very, very young and may not have participated in an election before. So how can you expect them to be writing anything very useful about election observation if, in some cases, they just don't get elections, let alone election observation? That's not always the case, but often, and the media here have tell us as well, you know, they won't be sending their best, their sharpest, always be sending their sharpest reporters to cover observation, because there's a lot going on at that time. It's a very crowded media environment at that time. Okay, what the media covers, you won't be surprised to hear this. They cover the deployment, which is often quite dull. They say, okay, this mission is here. This is how many people there are, might say what countries they're from if they're international, and how long they're here, and broadly what their mandate is. And what they do cover as well are preliminary statements. Or they cover preliminary statements. Remember, of course, the media has its influences in this country as well as others, and they might cover some preliminary statements if those preliminary statements fit with where their political allegiances may or may not be. We know, and ELOG, I'll be speaking about this later on, their statements, their reports are very detailed, yeah? Which to me adds huge credibility to the work that you guys do. And you're aware that you need to be very careful in what you write. So I know this is high pressure work, writing these preliminary statements, and you need to get those words right. So it's quite complex and nuanced what you do write, but the media doesn't want complexity and it doesn't want nuance. It wants free and fair, yeah? So there's a mismatch between what you guys are trying to convey to the public about the credibility of your work and all the intricacies of that, and what the media wants to say. And by the time the final report goes out, the public, the media say the public don't care. I wonder if this is also the media and their agenda, because if the media did make a lot of the final reports, then maybe the public would be more interested in it. But that's what the media say. Next slide. So journalists and editors are cynical about the motivation of politicians' comments on observers. Yeah, I didn't find these the most fruitful elite interviews as talking to politicians about observation. Sometimes it could be very insightful, but particularly after the election, if a politician is aggrieved, they'll have particular things to say about observers, as you might imagine. And the media tends to be cynical about that because, of course, the politicians are political. Yeah, media houses often aligned, as I said, and in all three of our case study countries, this was Kenya 2022 and the Gambia and the Zambia 2021, observation itself and the elections more broadly were not particularly controversial. You know that in this country there was some controversy, but that's relative. But in terms of observation, there wasn't anything compared with the past and previous elections that was particularly controversial. So things might have been different for this study had things worked out differently, but mercifully things went smoothly. Next slide, please, Marcus. Yeah, so which observer groups get coverage? A small amount, a large range of observation groups get a small amount of coverage. Those statements that come out early tend to get the most coverage, and citizen observer groups tend to be at an advantage here because they tend to get their statements out earlier. Yeah, next slide. So what journalists and editors say about how observation coverage can be improved: engage early. You guys do this. This is another advantage you have. You have existing links with the media. You know the media landscape. You know who to speak to, when to speak to them, how to speak to them. Yeah. This is more a point, I think, engage early for international groups that could definitely learn from the expertise of citizen groups. At the press conferences I went to in Kenya, very well attended by the media. There was one in the Gambia where some journalists were not invited by one of the observation groups. Not intentionally. There was a clash on the scheduling there, which in itself is quite political between observer groups. And also, and this is something again that citizen observers do, and not least you guys in this country, is to use local languages in your dissemination. And some international groups don't do that. So I think there, in terms of media engagement, there's a lot that international groups can learn from the likes of ELOG. And then finally, we presented a brief piece on how coverage could be improved, and that's available on the website. I won't go into that in any detail. Okay, so this is sort of a side piece that I did while I was here conducting, looking at election observation for quite a lot of last year, is I realized that there were so many citizen observer groups. I saw this, and I'll explain this. I saw this in different ways. There was this massive proliferation of observer groups. And what I've presented, or what I'm presenting now, it's actually a chapter for a book that I'm editing on election observation at the crossroads. Yeah, how I'll present here is I'll provide an overview of the domestic groups that obtained accreditation for the 2022 elections here. And I identify 4 main types of observer groups. It'll be interesting to get your thoughts on this. Don't worry, ELOG does very well out of this. And I then use this typology as a basis for providing I've spoken to quite a few people about this, but frankly, my explanation as to why there was such a large number of domestic observation initiatives at the last elections. I won't go into the methodology, but basically I spoke to a lot of people, and I was also in some instant messaging groups that some of you guys might have been in, some of those WhatsApp groups. Yeah. Okay, so these are the 4 main groups that I've come up with. I'm calling them the 4 Ps. The professionals, the part-timers, the pop-ups, and the partisans. I think you can all relate to some of those groups there. You're the ELOG are the professionals. It's okay. I don't mention many names, but in terms of the professionals, okay, what we've got are, if you can go back 1 and then a second. Yeah, thanks. So The criteria to be an observer here has not changed since the last elections. But there's been a substantial increase in accreditation. In 2017, the total number of accredited domestic and international observers was 58,000. Last year it was 120,000. One explanation for the increase could be, I'm sure is a credible explanation for this, is the high stakes nature of the 2022 competition. As you know, President Kenyatta was standing down, a new administration was inevitable, so more groups felt the need to deploy missions to observe what analysts rightly predicted would be a closely fought contest. So you would expect more observers at a higher stakes election. For the 2022 elections, international observers increased by 3,000. Their domestic counterparts increased by 60,000. So a huge increase of domestics. And the 120,000 observers that IEBC accredited in 2022 belong to 509 observer groups. This is based on information I got from IEBC. It wasn't very easy to get this information formally. It should be information that is in the public domain. I managed to get the information, but it would be good if I could get something formal from IEBC, yeah? And then maybe these figures could be updated in relation to that. 461 of those are domestic groups, and the remaining 46 are international observation missions. There's a bunch of observation missions in there. I'm quite familiar with observation missions in much of the continent, international ones. This one included some groups such as the Civic Chamber of the Russian Federation from Moscow. So there are, you know, the household name election observation groups amongst the internationals, and there's some others as well. And we talk about motives later on in relation to domestic observers. Locating these 461 domestic groups and trying to find information about them was very challenging, very challenging. Preliminary statements were only issued by 19 domestic groups. It's a requirement, I believe, of IBC that everyone that gets accreditation should issue a preliminary statement and a report. Only 19 citizen groups issued a preliminary statement. That number actually drops to 9 if the joint preliminary statement of the Umbrella and Gaza movement is taken into account. So there's a lot of observer groups, 461, and we get 9 preliminary statements or reports afterwards. The vast majority of these 461 were entirely invisible. Some of these groups are likely based outside the counties that the research team were operating in during the lead up to the elections. That's Kisumu, Nakuru, Nyeri, Samburu, Uasin Gishu, Wajir, and on ED itself, Kiambu, Nakuru, Nairobi, and Nyandarua. Only 20 domestic groups were identified as providing in the public domain information about their observation activities, with that number reducing to 10 if you take Angaza as one. Of the remaining 441 domestic observation organizations for whom no public information about their observation activities could be found, we know that 1,066 observers were issued with accreditation by IEBC at one point in August 2022. This is only a snapshot and doesn't include accreditation that was issued to further domestic observers at the times leading up to E-Day. And I know that was quite a haphazard, it was quite a fraught time of, you guys will know that as well, of the issuance of accreditation by IEBC. I must say, this is not a criticism of IEBC. I know that EMBs in all the countries I've worked on are under immense pressure in the lead up to elections, and there's all sorts of people who are trying to take their time. So this isn't aimed at IEBC here. Drawing on the reported number of observers as given in domestic observation groups' preliminary statements or final reports they made available to the public, these 9 groups that provided this information deployed around 6,000 observers. I'm going a little bit into the information here before we we talk more broad brush about my conclusions, but I think it's useful to get a sense of the depth of opacity, let's say, if that's a contradiction, if that's a useful phrase. But yeah, we can deduce based on that information that around 100,000 observers were deployed by the 441 domestic organizations that offered no public information about their activities. Based on other sources of information, including incomplete figures from IBC, and the numbers of one domestic group as reported by an international observation group, an additional 3,000 observers could be identified as receiving accreditation for a total of 61 groups. It leaves approximately 97,500 accredited observers deployed by about 380 domestic groups, of which nothing is known outside the IBC. So what follows here is an analysis of various sources, at times scant, information on these groups that helps paint a picture of the motivations of the broad range of domestic observation initiatives that were accredited in the elections. Okay, so, back please. Back, yeah, so there we go. That's the typology I'm using again. Professionals, part-timers, pop-ups, and partisans. Next one, please, Marcus. Thanks. Okay, professionals. These are experienced, that's a key term, they're experienced professional groups. They're motivated chiefly by a genuine desire to promote the integrity of the elections. This will be familiar language for you. They're non-partisan. They're methodical. And they undertake a credible assessment of the electoral process. They tend to have a higher profile in the country than other domestic groups. ELOG clearly has a higher profile than many of those groups that I've been mentioning. Yes, well done. And they tend to have a higher international profile. So while I work in the various countries of the research here, I, for example, was in DC. I've been in London talking with other international groups. And you know, ELOG is known. A lot of these groups are not. So they tend to have a higher international profile. And I think that's often because they're members of the Global Network for Domestic Observers and endorsers of the Declaration of Global Principles. Next, please. In fact, if you go back one, AISA, this is the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, Joburg-based NGO that specializes on election observation, gives special mention to ELOG for their role in exercising independent verification of the key electoral processes. And the EU election observation refers to ELOG as or says the main citizen election observation in Kenya is ELOG, which provided the most comprehensive final report of the few domestic groups that produce one. That's me saying that actually, having read or accessed all of these reports. Yeah, so clearly credible assessment, methodical. Okay, next please, Marcus. Part-timers. So the small number of experienced groups with a genuine desire to promote the integrity of elections is far outweighed by inexperienced groups and their members who appear to have the same motivation, if not the skills to undertake credible observation. And in contrast to the DOGP endorsing the GNDEM members for whom observation is their core business, it's ELOG's core business, these novice outfits do not primarily work on elections, and as such are unprofessional part-timers. They're the modern-day domestic equivalent of what were referred to as international dabblers that were identified in the 1990s as creating short-term, poorly prepared delegations for high-profile elections. And their experience was very clear to me in the WhatsApp groups, that's for sure, where there was clear evidence of inexperience, lack of training, unsure of their role and responsibility as observers, what to observe, how to report. Yeah. Next slide, please. So the IBC's requirement that accredited observer groups submit final reports to the Commission largely fell on deaf ears, as I said. In late November 2022, nearly 4 months after the elections had been concluded, a representative of one high-profile domestic observer group here commented that the sheer number of local groups, 98% are irrelevant, none have released reports. And then another, this was an IABC source, only a small amount of domestic groups submitted reports. And then finally, this is someone who's worked with African Union missions, who is a Kenyan. I've been called to edit them, and it's pathetic. There's no quality control in methodology, so I question the quality. This sounds quite harsh of me. It is quite harsh of me. But frankly, this is what I'm seeing, and I'm trying to show the sort of broad brush gradation differences between these four groups. That said, and I've had a discussion with a couple of people here a few weeks ago about this, there is some sort of overlap, there's some crossover between these groups depending on individuals. Sometimes the group get better, sometimes they slip. Next, please. Thirdly, I'm calling these the pop-ups. They're essentially a subset of the inexperienced, the one before, less credible observation bodies, and they bear many of the same characteristics. They too are transient, they're seldom methodical and rarely produce reports. What sets them apart, though, is their exceptionally entrepreneurial approach to observation, in which promoting the integrity of election appears to be secondary to the potential gains of taking part, financial gains of taking part. So much like retail pop-up shops, the pop-up homegrown observation missions are established when they identify an income-generating opportunity. In the short term, this may be the prospect of their observers being paid to observe. They can also use the elections as a time to identify future funding for partners for their CBO, as is evident in a lot of the discussions I saw in the WhatsApp groups. And also, like the pop-up shops, the pop-up missions only operate for a very short period of time before they disappear. And there's a quote here, CBOs, NGOs in this space. This was someone from a GNDEM member, so one of the professional groups, referring to when I talked about pop-up groups. CBOs, NGOs in this space want to engage, but don't necessarily have the technical capacity, and this is an opportunity to get funding. They get accredited, and then what next becomes the issue. That's most of the Kenyan observer groups. I'm being careful here not to give figures. I don't have accurate figures as to how many, what the proportions are between these four. The professionals are small in terms of groups, large actually in terms of the amount of observers that you deploy. And finally, the partisans. This is the one I suspect we all wanted to hear. Okay, I don't give any names here. The final category are those that are partisan. They're best be described for what they're not, I think. The DOGP defined non-partisan election observation by citizen organizations as being impartial towards all political parties and candidates. So these partisan groups, on the other hand, they're not neutral, and they use their accredited status as an opportunity for political interference in the electoral process. I favor the term partisan because it covers a multitude of sins that all involve some form of political interference. Often this is used for international groups, zombie observers, or fake, or bogus, or phony. But all of these, including, I would say, partisans domestically, they all spin this rosy but untrue narratives designed to cause confusion among the public and detract from the work of the credible and the sometimes excluded observation groups. Okay, I won't go into any detail about some international ones that I've come across in this election and the previous election that might fall into this category. You'll have to read the chapter, which I can make available. I've learned that it's going to be open access. Okay, I have a lot more on that, but there's not the time. So we're going to go on to, politicians are cunning, we know that. We'll move on to the next one. Okay, so why so many? And I've got 4 main points here that I'll finish on. The first is on grievances and opportunities, and this is in part of the literature. Someone that works on domestic groups in particular around the world identifies motivations, and I think this is a key one as to why there's so many. Everyone, observer groups that we spoke to, all talked about the importance of election observation. A lot of citizens did as well, ordinary voters. Election observation is important, which is great to know that people think that. Many people in this country cite incidents of serious malpractice during previous elections, and we know that at times that's happened. So it is a motivation. There's a grievance, so you would seek to observe. Frankly, this is how I got into election observation. In my country, I was disenfranchised. a long, long time ago. Postal vote never got to me. And I thought, well, I want to work then with the Electoral Commission on E-Day, and then I got into international observation. But yeah, so it's exactly the same in my case. There's a grievance, so you want to get involved. Second, please. Also the enabling environment. It's very, very easy to get accreditation in this country. And I suppose for IEBC, there's a balance for themselves, is that they want to be open and allow people to observe. Absolutely makes sense. So it is an easy process, and there's some quotes on why that's easy. But there is an enabling environment. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, yeah? I think it's great that we know of other countries in the continent further south of here that have had elections recently where observers, it's been very, very difficult to observe. That is absolutely not the case in Kenya. So this is actually encouraging. But I think this helps explain the enabling environment. It's easy to get accreditation. Next slide, please. The penultimate one. Okay, work. I've put this in inverted commas. The announcement text on social media from IEBC that explains the accreditation process to potential observers. It refers to accredited organizations' work. Yeah? It says become an observer, and it refers to it as work. What it doesn't mention in that text is that that work, which by some interpretations implies employment, we go to work, it's employment, is unpaid. Yeah? So this could be a motivation for some people as to why they might start up their own suitcase or pop-up group, yeah? Is, well, it looks like there's an opportunity here. So this might be our pop-ups here. And the last one, please, Marcus. Thanks. And the last one's vetting. The IEBC appears, and I didn't have access to this, and it necessarily needs to be a secretive process, I guess, in some ways. They appear to conduct minimal due diligence on the entities that are accredited. I've put appears in italics here. If we could just go, yeah. So one IEBC source saying there are those observer groups whose leadership is not actively in politics but are funded by politicians, and you only find that out later. So someone from IEBC said this to me. You know, you find out later that they're partisan, but you don't know beforehand. I imagine if there's a lot of people or groups applying for accreditation right at the last minute, that puts stress on the vetting process to really know who these people are and to whether they might be partisan or not. And the last quote here, oh, it's gone, but I think you get the gist. Because of delays in bureaucracy in IEBC, this is someone from one of the professional groups, if they're accrediting the day before elections, which seem to be happening, of course there are problems. Politicians applied and just got given observer accreditation. The IEBC formal engagement in this vetting accreditation process is something to look at. I have some quotes which I don't have time for here. I've got 27 seconds. From accredited groups where they basically said to me that they were partisan and that they were politicians. I have one quote where someone's saying, yeah, we have the sons of politicians who are accredited observers. As observers, notedly, not as political party, what's the term? Agents, yeah. So I'll leave it there. That's my feeling as to why there was such a proliferation of observer groups, and it's 0 seconds, so thanks very much.
Thank you very much for the ELOG team that is in the house. I think we have been given very good feedback, interesting insights from the report. Now, because of time, I would like us to move to a very short tea break. As our program indicates, we now move to tea break. So we'd like to take you through a very brief presentation of our report, the report that will be shortly unveiled. And this report was informed by a number of areas and issues. I think Susie, in her opening remarks, mentioned some of them. ELOG has been in existence and has observed a number of processes we observed the 2010 referendum, we observed the 2013 electoral processes, we observed the 2017 processes, and the 2022 electoral processes. And a number of issues have been raised in our reports. And of course, some of you are aware, our elections have become very emotive. We have very emotive electoral period, usually just before the elections, and many months later, even after the actual casting of the ballot and the declaration of results. So arising from our observation findings, ELOG has consistently recommended the need for an assessment, for an audit of our elections, just to ascertain why is it that our elections have increasingly become high stakes? Why do they drive and incite so much emotions? And a number of issues have been highlighted in our report that Susie mentioned earlier on in her opening remarks. The issue of trust in the systems that we use in our elections, the issue of suspicion, and as well as the ones that relate to the EMBs, whether it's IBC, political parties, and other institutions that collaborate in ensuring that our elections meet the threshold prescribed in our legal instruments. The issue around non-adherence, consistent non-adherence to our laws, almost bordering in impunity, has been documented by ELOG. We have significant gaps in our elections management and administration, of course, consistently contributing to making our elections behave and attract emotions as they do. We also have what we call the zero-sum politics, a major issue, where the winner is seen to be taking all, and of course inadequate political will, especially in terms of enacting some of the reforms that are required for our elections. The issue of lack of inclusion and diversity in our system has been documented, with a number of stakeholders feeling left out in the processes, and therefore they say we disown this process. We don't feel that we are part and parcel of the process that is out there. The issue around cost of election has been raised. Our election in Africa, it is the most expensive in Africa, and in the world, almost the second most expensive in the world. So what are the cost drivers of our elections? Are our elections affordable? If elections belong to the people, if elections are supposed to allow everyone to effectively participate in them, then why do you make the cost of elections quite expensive? The reports have identified electoral fraud as a significant issue, and of course technology as both something good, but also an issue that has led to a number of discord. Open the server. The issue of server opening is part of technology-driven process. So then all this context, we ask ourselves then now, these issues that we have identified as core issues that continue to affect our elections, then drove ELOG to undertake an assessment. We ask ourselves, there is need for us then to go out to the public, ask them what they think, document their responses, and make suggestions for critical reforms. We then commissioned a study, a national study, that we went all around the country. But we used what we call our regional observation platforms as the areas that we visited. So our main objective of this study was to assess whether the 2022 electoral processes met expectations of citizens. And we mean the processes also, we also mean the actors that were managing those processes. And of course, here we're asking ourselves most specifically whether the citizens themselves engaged in the elections that were conducted last year and other related processes. We also asked the questions and assessed whether there was compliance to to the legal framework that governed those processes, and also ask ourselves what was the level of effectiveness of their performance of those key agencies in the electoral processes. So we ask questions around IEBC, questions around police, questions around judiciary, questions relating to political parties as effective as agents of our electoral processes. Then, of course, based on those objectives, then we then documented the critical recommendations that have come from the citizens in terms of how then do we improve our electoral processes. In terms of methodology that the study employed, we used two broad methodologies. We had a desktop review, which essentially allowed the study to look at data on our electoral processes. We used our own reports from 2010 all the way to 2022. We used other observation reports. We used other data from other civil society organizations, what they have said about our elections. Then we also went to the field. To collect data. We went to the field to listen to the citizens, engage with them, ask them questions that we guided them on. So we employed the focus group discussions where we had a few guys brought into a room, and we, of course, then facilitated the discussions based on a questionnaire that we had developed. We also had key informant interviews, which then allowed us to speak with certain key experts in the electoral processes, talk to them, again, ask them their views, their thinking, and what they think would be the best way to improve our processes. We also employed a third field assessment methodology where we engaged a survey firm, which also collected views from the field. I won't go into the legal framework that governs our elections, but of course, again, we confined ourselves within the legal architecture of our country, and those are some of the laws that we were able to talk about. So without wasting much time, I would like therefore to invite Mule Musau, who is our national coordinator, to take us through some of the key highlights of findings and the recommendations. Karibu.
Thank you, Marcus. And so I'll take you through the key findings based on this particular report. Just to say from the onset, we call the report Vile Tunaicheki, and I saw a comment, one emerging from Tom's presentation about use of language as a key issue. But then we also owe the name to Dr. Kathleen, because in one of the sessions that we were having with her, she decided to introduce Gen Z in terms of the kind of issues which are emerging from them. And therefore, we decided let's reference the title of the report in a way that appeals to that particular generation. In any case, they are the coming voters. They're the ones who are going to be deciding the issues of governance of this country moving forward. So to the key findings, it was a very comprehensive study, and we were able to pick up quite a number of issues. So what I'll be highlighting are just the key issues that we were able to pick out from that, as well as the recommendations that therefore come from that. So one of the key findings in terms of trust levels, which was highlighted as a context issue by Marcus, is that 44% have no trust in IEBC. Now, it's important that we put this in context. These are the people speaking. Remember, there is the ELOG report, which was a technical report on the observation. But this is now what the people are saying based on the survey and the work which was done. There's no trust in the IEBC. The ones who trust IEBC are 32%, and 24% are very neutral. So they have a neutral opinion. IEBC is also seen as ill-prepared, under state capture, and controlled by external forces. There is also the talk, the feedback that we got in terms of that the capture of the EMB was localized, with polling stations being the new frontier of the capture. And if you go into the report, one of the things, and it's good that Madam Kolundu is here, if you go inside the report, some of the things that they say is that you go to a polling station and they tell you, we know who the people who have been employed are. We know which family they come from, because they know them. And then we know also the political persuasion of those particular individuals. So there is that localization story, which you couldn't see, of course, when you're doing our technical report, but when you ask the people, they tell you, we think then they are biased. Whether that bias, of course, results in some malpractice is another story altogether, but that's their feeling. On the voter register, 70% found, and this is very interesting because we thought when the issue of the biometric kits and other things, we thought we were going to make things easier. But they say the 70% of the voter registration process was complicated or complex. And Nairobi, very interestingly, Nairobi, 74%, Coast 72%, Rift Valley 70%, had the highest rates in terms of those who viewed this process as complicated. So again, you're wondering, in these urbanized zones, where is this story coming from? So those are questions we need to interrogate moving forward. Schools were offered as the best centers for registration with 64%. In terms of voter education, and remember, I'm just giving you highlights so that we can be able to read the report. So it's not everything on voter registration. We'll be able to get more from the report. On voter education, this scored very well. Many citizens say they are well informed on the various processes, the political rallies, from the various sources, the political rallies, the community forums, social media, religious places, the radio and TV, and they also recognize the importance of the voter education. We have the members of the special interest groups largely feeling that they have been left out of this effort to educate. And we know how critical the question of education then serves for voters. So on the SIG, that's where the score is negative. But there's a general feeling that voter education is going well. Yeah, so on the malpractices on voting and the voting process and security, many people out there felt that they were actually observed. There are people who say they observed ballot stuffing. I thought this is something of the past. There is the question of voter intimidation, violence, and voter interferences. They also have raised issues on the voter list discrepancies, where we have names of those voters whose names are missing from the list, indicated inadequate information from IEBC clerks on how that problem needed to be addressed. We also, some of them noted lack of ballot secrecy, intimidation by hired criminal gangs, long queues, and overcrowding was reported. I think that's something that some of us are also aware about. On the legal framework, there is inadequate implementation of an otherwise robust electoral, legal, and policy framework. And Dr. Owaka and Kathleen will tell you that we were also pleasantly surprised that Kenyans are much aware about the legal framework. It was an area that we thought they are not aware of when we set out to conduct the study. But they indicated a level of knowledge, but they're saying, while it looks good, the implementation has problem. And they also raised the question of having critical laws enacted too close to the elections. And then, of course, the gaps in terms of some of the key laws, like the two-thirds gender rule, which are yet to be implemented, were cited. Now, on political parties, there was some interesting feedback. One of them is the power of manifestos during electoral campaigns. So majority of the citizens indicated that their selection of a candidate, that this is very useful for political parties, was influenced by the political party manifesto. That is 71%. Experience and development record at 30%, prioritizing integrity 12%, and political campaigns 8%. So the manifesto is a key document in terms of selling a candidate or selling a candidature in the election. Integrity was predominantly mentioned in the Nairobi region, where 20% of the respondents highlighted its importance in terms of selecting candidates. So integrity in terms of does the candidate have past master as far as integrity is concerned, Nairobi seemed they are much more aware of that. But predominantly it is the manifesto. But remember, in the last years, just put it into context, we have the dynasty versus hustler narratives. I don't know whether that is maybe Daktari Owaka could elucidate on that. Is it that manifesto, it is the other manifesto where dams and projects and plans, much more formalized manifesto is shared. There were concerns about the violence during the campaigns, especially affecting special interest groups, and that recorded a high incident rate. On elections results, there was divided feedback. Kenyans held divided sentiments in reference to the security of the country's electronic transmission system. 45% of the respondents believe that the system was not secure. And subsequently, of course, it goes on, they go on to say, then we can therefore trust the results, which came through such a process. 33% of the respondents affirmed that they believe the system was good, secure, while 21 stated that it was neither sure nor unsure. On dispute, EDR, dispute resolutions, this again we feel scored very well. Majority of the participants had a fair understanding of the EDR process. Again, this was a surprise. We thought this was one of the obscure areas of the electoral process. So they say, we understand that process. And some of the experts that, but it says they lacked clarity in terms of how it was being processed. Experts interviewed indicated that there was a need to streamline the appeal processes to address concurrent jurisdictions. I think this one is very clear also in our other reports, that we have the PPDT, we have IBC, we have different fora in which EDR activities are processed. So there's need for clarity as far as that is concerned. Now, an interesting, again, observation on the political party, which are calling undemocratic, and the word democratic here does not impute any issues on the political party itself, is on how the citizens are engaged in the political party processes, because by democratic we mean that it is people-centered. So 78% did not participate in political party activities, while 22% of reported their active involvement. So basically the converse. So 78% is the number that we are looking at. They are not participating in any political party activity. There's lower participation among the elderly, mixed satisfaction with political party nominations. 38% respondents expressed a neutral stance, stating that they were neither satisfied nor dissatisfied with the political party nominations. 37% of the study participants stated they were not satisfied, while 25% of the respondents noted that they were satisfied with the political party primaries. And then the participants noted party patronage. And there were also gaps in the oversight and regulations of the political parties by the ORPP. This was also noted by the respondents. So I think that basically what we're trying to say is that there is an interesting aspect where people want to use a party manifesto or the manifestos shared in the campaigns, but they are not participating in those political parties themselves. And by the way, you know the statistics that you also have in this country where the ORPP has more members in joining political parties than Ruth Kulundu here at IBC. IBC register was at 22.1. The ORPP register of members in a political party is more than 24 million. So it's very interesting how people join political parties more and participate less in voting. It's something that perhaps as actors we may need to interrogate further. There is improved participation in the SIGs that is the special interest groups in the electoral process. There is also the survey showed an improvement in number of women and SIG candidates. I think that is also out there. Women aspirants and candidates faced a much more hostile political environment, including propaganda, smear campaign, and violence. Youth participation increased, but majority of them were elected as MCAs. I think this is in terms of candidates. So we had many of them participated as MCS. And then persons with disabilities face barriers with most reaching parliament through nominations. So again, in terms of getting PWDs to getting directly elected in the process is much more difficult. Political participation for women, youth, and PWDs fell far short of international standards and failed to meet Kenya's constitutional requirements, especially on the 1/3 gender quota. And some participants expressed the need to remove the provisions on the 2/3 gender rule. So there are those also who are saying, this thing has become too cumbersome. If you cannot be able to implement it, then just get it out. A very small number. We just thought it was important to mention it. Let me move to the quickly to the recommendations which came from this report. Number one is that there's an issue of IEBC needing to broaden its understanding of SIGs by conducting a study to understand and ensure reasonable accommodation at the registration centers in addition to the access to polling stations. So the question of accessibility to polling stations for SIG needs to be addressed by IEBC. We also require enhanced transparency and accountability to enforce, to curb irregularities during voter registration, which is one of the issues which is making it complicated. There is a need for systematic public awareness campaigns to educate individuals on the importance of voter registration, again, because of the complexity involved or what has been reported. Flexible registration options for SIGs given their realities. For example, the nomadic lifestyle of pastoralist communities should be considered by introducing mobile voter registration. If it is there, I don't know. I think it's a discussion that we've been having. It is there. So I think maybe it is the people are saying they may not be aware of it. So maybe we need robust engagement again on that area. Staggered mass voter drives targeting the pastoralist communities, especially before they move to look for pasture. Partnerships and stakeholder engagement, where is collaborating with local community leaders, civil society organizations, and other relevant stakeholders is essential. I think all those are means or recommendations to enhance the visibility of especially IBC engagements with the communities on voter registration and other processes. On voter education, introduction of voter education in schools to cultivate a sense of patriotism and civic duty for learners. Engage collaborators, amongst them CBOs, NGOs, religious communities in promoting voter education. I think that happens, but maybe a much more robust engagement. Use of social media platforms, I think they are listed down there, but remember what we were saying earlier about the language and about the Gen Zs, the generation that we are targeting. Maybe we need now start to tweak our engagement with them through such platform. Although in our other reports, we'll also be able to, we are also reporting on fake news and disinformation, which is also carried by such platforms. Use of community-based workshops, barazas, and in conducting in-person workshops and training sessions in community centers. And the use of offline digital content such as videos and interactive presentations that can be distributed through USB drives. On the voting process, quick recommendations: elimination of the incidences of long queues in the country. I think one of the issues which is, these issues is being discussed, if you look at it from a citizen point of view, when people come, we've all been voters. When you come to a voting station and you find a very long queue, there are people who have the passion to stay on. And there are those who say, well, I think these guys can vote for me. And they go back. Or they are also the issue of you're committed to other things. And when you go back, you don't ever come back to the so you need to address that issue. Because there are very many people who are turned back by just that occurrence or that incident of finding a very long queue. So I think that's why it's an issue for the citizens. Clarify the guidelines on identification of voters. In cases of lost, misplaced national IDs, missing names, what is the guideline? And I think in this respect, we had asked the IEBC in the last election to provide us with the election day protocols, because we need to also create visibility over the procedures. What needs to happen when somebody does not have this? What is the next thing to be done? So we all need to work together to create clarity on what the process is. clean up the voter register and have the particulars checked by the registered voters on a continuous basis to avoid last-minute surprises. I think, if I'm not wrong, Ruth, that happens at the constituency offices. The problem is I don't think people know that they can actually walk into an IBC office and check on that. So because they're telling us we need it to be on a continuous basis. Okay. But you can see there's a report saying something. So we need to see where the gap is. Invest in backups in case of alphanumeric system fails. I think those are just general. I don't want to go to all this. I'm trying to get into something different so that, because you'll have the report and you can be able to go through it. On voter security, there's a need for citizens to resist voter bribery, corrupt practices, and hold political parties accountable. So that is something in looking. I think they are saying, can we look within ourselves? Maadili, issues about integrity in the entire voter process also starts with the voters themselves. During the elections, IBC to ensure that all personnel, officials, and voters are adequately protected. There were issues about IBC and their security. And in fact, in the run-up to that election, one of the things that we were very worried about was the safety of IBC officials because of what had happened during the by-elections which were running up to that election. So, and then we also saw what happened during the elections itself. So protection is a big issue that needs to be taken on board. The police also need to come in terms of looking into the cases of political profiling, the harassment, assaults, injuries, as well as electoral legislation violation, and ensure that there's a prosecution of the offenders. Again, this is something that we have also raised in other reports, the question of enforcement of electoral offenses as a key issue. On the legal framework, a post-election audit is required to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of the overall. We have, IBC of course have conducted their evaluation of that process. What ELOG has been saying in addition to that is to conduct an external one, much more comprehensive. We made a submission yesterday to the bipartisan talks, and we are saying, can we have a wider evaluation, a Kriegler-like evaluation? Because it allows us to see all the gaps, whether we are talking about the electoral system, which is not an IBC problem, or whether we're talking about the legal framework and other aspects of the election, so that we can be able to come up with a raft of recommendations to solve the emerging problems. Efficiency and knowledge base for IBC required judiciary to invest in training judicial officers in election dispute settlements, the National Police Service to invest in training security agents in the nature of electoral laws and the application on electoral offenses for effective investigation and prosecution, and early warning systems to be put in place for detecting and arresting election-related conflict. Again, let me not go into all those things around the legal framework because I'm just sampling some of the recommendations. And then I come to electoral results. So one of the proposals or one of the recommendations is the staggering of elections, especially the presidential elections, to minimize dissatisfaction and anxiety. Further, it would ensure Kim's kids do not fail and were overwhelmed with respect with respect to identifying voters during the voting process. I think the clear recommendation here is also something that the Law Society was speaking about yesterday. The staggering of elections in such a way that national elections and the county elections are held separately, so that the anxiety that is created by this one election, because there's a lot of overwhelming excitement about the presidential election, is reduced. I don't know about the costing elements. Those are the questions that we can be able to discuss in terms of whether it is more expensive to do that, but it is one of the recommended ways of making it much more effective. Ban politicians from tallying centers. I don't know how this will happen. Their presence caused pockets of violence continuously within the facilities, including the day the results were being announced. You know, we are picking these recommendations from the people. So when people say they saw politicians misbehaving at Bomas, they're saying, let them not be there. So the mechanism of how you can do that, whether it's through by accrediting the agents and other people, maybe is a regime that we may need to review. Proper communication channels to be instituted to ensure that information at the National Tallying Center is received accurately and consistently. From a media point of view, the media tallying was different from every station, creating anxiety amongst the citizenry. And you all know this. You know, we are seeing NTV is carrying out this, the Citizen is carrying this, KTN is carrying a different tally. It was not the same. And that creates anxiety amongst the citizens. So they feel maybe there is a need that needs to be well coordinated so that the information comes at the same time. Then there's advocacy and lobbying for all actors, especially the SIGs and the PWDs on the same process. Reduction of the vulnerability of young who are susceptible to hiring for vigilantism due to poverty and unemployment. Questions about corruptions have been raised in terms of how we need to curb that. On security in the volatile areas, the recommendations are to enhance security deployment, collaborative security planning, especially with the local actors, early warning systems, conflict sensitivity training for security personnel, election officials, and other relevant stakeholders. Let me leave, I think most of that is interagency coordination. I think I've not mentioned it. Strong legal framework and impartial enforcement, making sure that those who are, you hold accountable those responsible for inciting violence. And then on the election results and the announcement, I think the bigger recommendation is there is a need to review the winner-take-all system. Everybody, the entire nation waits for one announcement before it can take a breath. You know, you hold our breaths just for that one announcement. So it goes with the bigger questions about evaluation and audit of the entire electoral system with purposes of trying to review this system that we feel creates a zero-sum game in the country. Streamline media tabulation of results. I think that was spoken about in the earlier recommendation. Continuous voter education. I think it is continuous. The issue is, I think there is an engagement that needs to be done with the public so that they are always in the know of what is going on. Although the other aspect about it, and I know IBC can speak about it, is the question of funding. Having a regime that allows IBC to have funds for a process which is continuous in the entire election cycle. And then the devolution of resource management. Now there's a question of explore the decentralization of resource management, possibly at the county level, while being mindful of the potential influence of political party agents coercing the IBC officials at that level. I think the issue here is, can we have county-based centers, tallying centers, even for the presidential, so that we know county 047 says this in terms of the presidential tallying, and then that is collected at Bomas to give a total, an overall result. An institutional responsibility of IBC towards the citizens, provide access to electoral processes for all stakeholders. I think this is one of the areas where we also say access even to the servers and such things, such processes. Address and eliminate technological vulnerabilities and loopholes at polling stations to enhance the integrity of the electoral process, and consider all the results to be electronically transmitted. This was also in our other report, that can we have all of them accessible through technology, electronically. Eliminate the tallying process at the national level, since polling stations are final. I'm not very sure about that particular one, because it's just tallying. The tallying is done at the polling station, and that is just basically tabulation of the same. On the EDR, I'm coming to the EDR. Let me speak about the EDR, pick one or two things. Enlarge the timelines for resolving the presidential elections. I think this has been canvassed across the place. Because we feel that the 14 days are not enough, and the number of courts that need to be determining the cases need to be increased so that you can be able to shorten the period in which we conduct the electoral, the petitions which emerge from elections. On the political parties, we have called for the recommendation of the, recommended that ORPP be anchored as one of the independent offices under Chapter 15 of the Constitution, so that it can be able to enhance its capacity to rein in on political parties, and then ensure that election and political party laws are clear in a clear manner that is in this law to punish party perpetrated violence. And also we have also picked on the question about the law on coalitions, because people are not very clear about that anymore. There's something called a coalition political party, and then there is the coalitions. So which is which? People don't know. We need clarity on some of those issues. On the appointment of the IEBC commissioners, because this was also part of the issues which are canvassed with the people, amend Schedule 1 of the IEBC Act to remove the presidential powers of appointments to the selection panel. Avoid manipulation of the results. To avoid manipulation of results, the selection panel needs to pronounce the successful candidates after the interviews and submit only 1 name for the chair and 6 for the members of the commission. So basically, rather than giving the president and parliament room to negotiate who is going to become the commissioner, give them the exact names. If they are rejected, they go back in total. They are then reviewed and then resubmitted. A fresh list is submitted. Devote the function of the commission since elections are final at the polling station. Early recruitment of commissioners to avoid strangers in the commission. You know, so the people, anybody who comes later, I don't know whether it will happen now. Madam Ruth and Marjana are in office. They are the secretariat at the moment. But if we delay this process and we have commissioners coming in 2025, even to the secretariat, they become strangers. And then the secretariat is the one now which becomes the main actor, or the two centers of power start emerging again because of the newness of the commission. So avoid strangers by having an early recruitment, and address standard operating procedures in cases where commissioners fail to agree on critical issues like results. So that issue of the split election screen is an issue that even the people are saying they don't want to see. So some issues like how do we agree on the results needs to be clear. Yesterday we said to the bipartisan committee that the protocols of the decision-making processes needs to be deposited in a public place, like Parliament, so that all of us know that's how they make their decisions, rather than just being left to that board or that committee to make the decisions and then interpret it for us. I think the others are just general comments which have been picked up from the process, and because of time, I don't want to get into all that. Since some of them are also featured in the thematically based recommendations. So I want to stop at that. I'll invite you to be able to read this report much more in depth so that you can be able to gather much more information, and if there are any other clarifications that need to be done, we'll be available to do that for you. I want to thank you for listening to me.
Then to the next agenda item, we have Monica Malith. If you could come and just say a few words. We'll probably request about 5 to 10 minutes for the subsequent speakers. Then Reverend Grace, prepare to come next.
It's still morning, huh? Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Monica Malith. I'm from the University of Nairobi, the chairperson or the president of the Students Association. And just to make a comment, I think for the past 3 or 4 elections that have been happening in Kenya, I have been here all along, and I've been seeing what is happening. And until this year, or maybe last year and this year when I took part in the students' elections, that I related so well with how the national politics elections are done. And then just to make a brief comment on it, as a common mwananchi, in my position as I stand here, I feel like from the onset of elections, there are 2 people involved, that is the candidates and the citizens. And these 2 people, all of them have their own expectations or people have their own opinions. And people's opinion, and then like in my elections when I was standing for student politics, there were opinions like the state has an interest in your University of Nairobi politics, and the administration has an interest. At the same time, the students have an interest. Now, who are the voters? When you go to national politics, they say the international, community have an interest in the Kenyan elections. The Kenyan themselves says there are people, particular people, who have interest in this and they must influence, and now the voters. If you study these three categories, there is misinformation that is given to the people, and this causes, I feel, causes the kind of tension that we have when it comes to elections and even observers. And then, as the human nature, we feel like there is someone I need and there is someone you need. And this has contributed so much to how we take elections as if it doesn't go my way, then it is wrong. See? So like there were two major political parties in Kenya in the last year's elections. That was the Azimio and then the ruling government now, which is the party that is the ruling government now. When we were sitting down, people will say, maybe Baba, people will vote him in because he has been losing elections. So people said, he'll win this time because the people of Kenya will favor him more. And then there was the fact that, because there was an assumption that the president who was just stepping down was in support of the Azimio party. And people perceived that the elections will surely favor the Azimio. So on that part now, when the results came out differently, people said that they were not fair, and they now went to court. What I will say there is that we need more education to the voters or to the general public on the fact that the outcomes of the results will not be determined on how you feel. It will actually be after the counting of votes, and after the votes have been counted, you will say, exactly these are the results, and you have to believe them from there. But when you have a perception that it is what I feel that should be presented, like when we were just making the presentation, 45% say that the results were not fair. It might be from the opposition party, you know, now that it's not in the government. And that goes down to how transparent, and when there was the presentation on the local or domestic elections of perception of the people, you realize that there are 4 or 5 categories of people who report about elections. And then again, the media, when I went, I felt like I was supporting. Of course, there was a party that I supported. So there is a particular media house that I'll go to, because that comforts me, and that I feel it's favoring the candidate I wanted. So that's another thing we feel. We have a lot of tension, we have a lot of opinions around, and this has to go down to the people to be educated, and they have to know exactly if the elections don't go the way they want, maybe this time they didn't mobilize more. So I'll call out maybe to the citizen education now by neutral bodies, because the voter education is mostly done by the aspiring teams. They go down and they have to educate people on what is expected of them, and if you do this, if you vote this way, that is done by people who are doing what, who are campaigning. But if this is a continuous process, every time, even before the elections are approaching, can the citizens be educated on what is happening, on what they should be done to, and like the rush hour kind of voter education that is done. At the same time, I feel like until I was part of elections this year, I felt like at times we have anxiety that is uncalled for. Because until today, people don't believe that I might have won elections fairly. But they were watching it live. It was live. There were observers. I think there were some of them from ELOG that were observing elections from the University of Nairobi. So until I experienced it, I felt like at times, okay, it is not fair. Elections are not fair until I took part in elections. So can we tell people more? Can we let them know that it is not what you feel, it is not what you expect, it is what is counted, you know? So I don't think I'll go much more into anything else, but as a student and who have taken part in elections, I feel there is more education needed on the process of elections and calming people's expectations and opinions. Thank you.
I can confirm that ELOG participated in that election as observation. We did observe the elections, and I think they were very, and I think you won the election from what ELOG, from what ELOG was able to observe. The servers were opened, so you won the election. So I would like to invite the Reverend Grace, who is our coordinator for the Upper Rift Valley. Karibu, Reverend.
Good morning. I am Reverend Grace Chelagat-Rugut. I'm the coordinator of ELOG, Upper Rift Valley region, and also I work for the National Council of Churches of Kenya as the regional manager. Allow me to present my remarks as follows. The 2022 general election in Kenya were a significant event for the nation. And the platforms under ELOG in our several counties played a crucial role in shaping the electoral landscape. Allow me now to present a brief overview of the Kenya elections 2022 with the perspective of assessing whether the citizens' expectations were met, identified gaps during the election, and the recommendation for the electoral improvements, also with views on the bipartisan committee for the national dialogue. On the election 2022, from the citizen perspective, it's that the 2022 elections in Kenya were a pivotal movement for the nation, featuring the presidential, parliamentary, gubernatorial, and the MCA seats. Citizens, international and local observers, and the global community had high hopes in these elections as they marked another step towards consolidating Kenya's democratic institutions. And in this, the citizens' expectations were met in this category. That the Electoral Commission took measures to ensure transparency. Key citizens' expectations, such as the right to vote and secure voting processes and access to information, were largely met. The voter turnout was also substantial, and this indicated that the citizens were actively engaged in the democratic processes. On peaceful election, one of the foremost expectations was the continuation of peaceful elections, and Kenya largely succeeded in this regard. The country avoided the violence that marred the 2007 elections, and this was partly due to the 2010 constitution and the improved electoral processes. On the transparent and credible processes, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission made significant efforts to enhance transparency. This was through the voter education, the use of technology, and also the presence of the local and international observers contributed to this. Inclusivity. The elections showcased inclusivity with significant increase in the number of women and youth candidates, which reflected the citizen demands for the diverse representation. Accountability, the electoral process demonstrated the accountability as candidates and political parties were held to high standards of integrity, and instances of voter bribery and electoral malpractices were reduced. There were gaps on this, and despite the overall success, the several gaps and challenges emerged. The technical issues. There were instances that there were technical glitches with electronic voter machine, causing delays and confusion in some polling stations. This raised concern about reliability reliability of technology in the electoral processes. For example, in a polling station in the village, whereby women come and their fingerprints cannot be detected because of the work they do. It really caused a lot of delays. There are those men who are farmers and their fingerprints could not be detected. So that one caused a lot of delays and confusion and making this to be a concern. There was also intimidation and violence. Reports of voter intimidation and violence and sporadic violence were observed in certain areas, but the incidents were underscored the need to improve security measures in and during the election period. There was also the disinformation, which was the fake news that were going around the media platforms. And this highlighted the importance of combating propaganda and promoting media literacy, because there was a lot of information in the media, and this caused a lot of anxiety. The recommendation is that there must be a high enhanced voter registration and education. This should be continuous, because for citizens, it's only during or almost near election that they get the voter education. But you find there are those who have challenges, like in Kalokol, that is Kalokol, Turkana Central. People have to use the boat to go and register. I think these services can be taken near them so that they are able to get enough information. Improved logistics, there is need to allocate more resources. In the banditry areas, prone areas where we work around, we find that there is still need for continuous monitoring. Most people are affected because they are moving from one village to the other one due to banditry. So there is need that this can be mitigated and people are able to vote in their villages. On the bipartisan committee for dialogue, the citizens feel that there are key sentiments from the citizens to this dialogue committee. Peace and reconciliation, the citizens feel that the committee is a crucial step forward to achieving peace and reconciliation, particularly following political disputes and tensions. Political representation, there is expectation that the committee will provide a platform for political parties from the region to have their voices, add and participate in the national dialogue. We need to bring everyone on board. There's need to bring the religious, they need to bring the youth together. There's also the feeling that there's transparency and fairness, and this emphasizes the importance to ensure all stakeholders are included in decision making. On conflict resolution, there is feeling that this committee is seen as an opportunity to address the long-standing political and ethnic grievances in reducing potential post-election violence and fostering unity. We have the general recommendations on elections. There is need to enhance technical preparedness for the elections and to look into the issues that can affect this. Strengthening of security measures. Law enforcers agencies should work collaboratively to ensure voter safety and prevent intimidation and violence. And voter education should be intensified to promote civic responsibility and peaceful participation. To combat this disinformation, there is need for EVOT to work with the civil society, technical companies, and the fourth state, and other organizations to encourage that there must be verification of the information before it is being sent out. On infrastructure, citizens feel that the government should prioritize infrastructure development in remote areas to ensure equal access to polling stations. This include also roads and improve transportation options. For example, during voting in Kalokol ward, the polling stations that I mentioned, it's only when we have the helicopter going there. But during these other times, it's only the boat. Why don't we have that helicopter during voter sensitization? I think that is their feeling, that we just see it once during election. So there is need to look into that so that as the citizens in the local areas will feel being involved in these processes. As I conclude, we endeavor citizens to be guided and to be taken through these processes of election. And we are ready to be in this process and learn and continue even exercising our rights as the citizens of Kenya. Thank you so much. From the Citizens Platform, we are here to continue the process. God bless.
You will notice that the format that we have taken, this is a citizen assessment, and we are requesting this, the citizen agencies to speak. So what you are hearing from are not really ELOG technical observation reports, rather these are sentiments that come from citizens. You've heard from Monica, a student leader who has shared our own experience. You heard from a citizen from the Upper Rift. Now I would like to hear from a citizen from coastal region, Bwana Bakari. Karibu. Let's clap for him. All the way from Mombasa. County 001.
Hello everyone. Is it still morning? I'm at Tumenda evening. In the afternoon, eh? Still morning. Okay, my name is Munyihaji Bakari. I work for Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims, SUPKEM. We are also the conveners of ELOG within the coastal region. Our co-conveners are FIDA. I don't know if we have FIDA guys with us here today. We don't. Oh, we have one. Thank you. I'm glad to be with you today. Kuna vipengele kadhaa ningependa kuzungumzia siku ya leo. Na ningependa kutumia lugha ya Kiswahili, na kwa wale ambao watakuwa wanatashwishi pengine tutaweza kusaidiana hapo mbele. Swala la kwanza ni masuala ya uhamasishaji. Uhamasishaji umekuwa ni changamoto kwa watu wetu, especially from the IEBC. Na changamoto hii imeletwa sana kwa sababu za kihali ya kifedha. Imekuwa ni kwamba most of the time tunafanya uhamasishaji wakati tunaelekea kufanya kura ama tunaelekea kupiga kura. But I would like to give thanks kwa FBOs and CSOs. Wamekuwa mstari wa mbele sana katika kuchampion agenda ya uhamasishaji katika mashinani kule tunatoka. One of the programs that I would like to focus on is also the Mulika initiative. And I think it's one of the initiatives ambao pia imetuweka hapa leo. Kwa kutumia viongozi wa kidini na mashirika kuhamasisha jamii, kueleza umuhimu wa upiga kura na jinsi gani ya kupiga kura. Katika initiative hii kumekuwa na engagement ya vijana, washikadau katika mashirika na pia wale ambao tuko nao katika masuala ya kidini. Imekuwa ni wakati mzuri sana kwa watu wa dini kuzungumzia masuala ya amani na upigaji kura kupitia madhabahu kwa wale ambao ni Wakristo. Kwa wale ambao ni Waislamu, tukitumia misikiti yetu na wakati wetu kumake sure that watu wetu wanapata ujumbe na ni jinsi gani wanaweza fanya upigaji kura. Swala lingine ningependa kuzungumzia ni swala la inclusion katika IEBC. Iko haja ya kuingiza ndani wanadini. Na hili silisemi kwa sababu just because I'm coming from an FBO. Haya ni masuala ambayo yameibuka kwa sababu ya zile effort ambao watu wetu wanaona wanadini wanafanya ku make sure that watu wetu wanaelewa jinsi ya kupiga kura na umuhimu wa kupiga kura. Na ni hali gani tunaweza kujitolea kujihusisha katika upigaji kura. So katika composition ya IEBC commissioners wanaona iko haja kwamba viongozi wa kidini, wanarika na wamama wawe watapatiwa nafasi ya kukaa katika ule mzunguko wa meza ku make decisions wakati tunazungumzia masuala ya upigaji kura. Swala lingine ni imani. Watu wengi wamekuwa wametoka imani na kitengo cha IEBC. Jambo hili limefungia watu wengi kujitolea kupiga kura. Na ndio maana pia tumeona on our last election the turnout was not that good. As much as we had an election, but the turnout is not as much as we would wish to see. So ili kutojirudia ni watu wakuwe emphasize umuhimu wa kujumuika pamoja between viongozi wa kisiasa, viongozi wa kidini na pia wale viongozi wa mashinani. Kwa sababu it's only that tutakapokuwa tunashirikiana pamoja, then tuko na imani ya kwamba Kenya yetu itakuwa pamoja. Na Kenya yetu itakuwa salama zaidi ya vile tumeona kwa hizi kura zimepita. Swala lingine ni swala la bipartisan talks. Ili swala limejitokeza mara kwa mara tukiwa na vikao, wakati we are having assessments with the people from where I'm coming from. Watu wengi wanasema ile fikra ya kwamba the winner takes it all has to be rectified in one way or the other. Kwa sababu wanaonelea kwamba yule ambaye amekuwa namba 2, japokuwa yuko namba 2, lakini angalia the mass ambao anaicontrol, the amount of votes ambazo amepatiwa na the amount of votes ambayo yule ameshinda amepata. Kuna nafasi ndogo sana between these two people. So kwa nini tusimu include katika maybe come back to the opposition leaders docket ama reintroduce what has been left out by the 2010 constitution of constituting an opposition leader office, ambao kwamba inakuwa facilitated, inakuwa iko na resources za kuendesha ino ofisi. Kwa sababu tukiwa na ofisi ambayo itakuwa inaendeshwa na rasilimali za serikali, mwanzo tutakuwa na accountability. Pili, wale ambao watakuwa ni namba 2 wako na sense of belonging, ama wanaona bado wao ni part of serikali, kwa sababu wako na nafasi na ofisi ya kuchannel out their views. Wako na mtu ambaye ako mbele, wanaweza muengage kwa mambo yao ama zile fikra zao na agenda zao kuendelea mbele. Last but not least, kumekuwa na mjadala wa kuinclude political education to our education system. At the grassroots level, ama katika ile level ya chini kabisa ya masomo. Let's say with the CBC introduction to our country, KICD 2021, miongoni mwa zile mandates wamepea kwa CBC ni citizenship. So kwa nini tusitumie ino nafasi ya citizenship? This is coming from the ground. Kwa nini tusitumie hii nafasi ya citizenship kuwafundisha watoto wetu katika mashule umuhimu, mwanzo, umuhimu wa upigaji kura. Pili, ni nani wa kupigiwa kura. Tatu, anastahili kuwa na nini mpaka mtu apigiwe kura kama kiongozi. Ili swala linatia imani na nguvu ya kuonyesha kwamba watoto wetu tukiendelea kuwafundisha wakati wako chini, basi itakuwa ni natija kwetu. Kule kwetu tunasema samaki mkunje angali mbichi. Kwa hiyo if we take this education to these kids at that level, tuko na imani kwamba baada ya wao kufikia umri wa kupiga kura, basi watapiga kura wakijua ni nani wa kumpigia kura, kwa nini wanampigia kura, na ni vipi watampigia kura. With those few remarks, I would like to say thank you very much. God bless you guys.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Bakari, for those remarks. I would like to invite Bwana Anthony Manyara, who is the President, East Africa Students Association, to just say one or two words.
Thank you so much. First of all, I begin by apologizing for arriving quite late. My name is Anthony Manyara. I'm the president of East African Students Union. I'm also the president of Kenya University Students Organization. That is the umbrella body for all universities in Kenya, TVET institutions, polytechnics. Each and every student in Kenya falls behind or falls under Kenya University Students Organization. Let me also say, I run an NGO called Youth Advocacy Africa, which we have partnered with IMBC. We are also very close friends to Elections Observation Group. And I'm happy to say, in 2022, we worked very closely to foresee, of course, the general elections in our country. And all I can say is that already we have a government in place, and we still see the fruits of us, joining hands to ensure the elections were free and fair. Let me also add that I'm very much humbled to be here amongst very dignified people who come from various organizations, who come from various agencies, NGOs, institutions. I've also seen Madam President here of University of Nairobi Students Association, Madam Monica Malith. Allow me to say that elections in Kenya, for a very long time, we have been progressing, and we are still yet to progress further. There are some years back when we could not have free and fair elections. With the multi-party democracy efforts in 1992, I think, whereby even university students participated, we are able to now elect our leaders through a democratic process. After some time, elections were not verifiable. After some time, elections were not credible. But we have progressed for a long time, and we now can be able to even see how the results are being mainstreamed and so forth. Because I have a very few minutes to speak, let me move towards conclusion by saying University of Nairobi, I was the president there, took over from Babu Owino in 2018, 2019. I became the first University of Nairobi Student Association president. And this brought about elections in our institutions through what we call college voting, which is a break from universal suffrage. I will call upon NGOs in Kenya to join efforts with Kenya University Students Organization to see how we can be able to bring back elections by universal suffrage. Simply because siku hizi, all of you can attest, the students' movement is quite quiet. Even as we speak right now, very many students have not been allocated help fund. And we are talking about the government proposing issues to do with education reforms, and yet they cannot be able to disburse the funds that are supposed to be allocated to those students. We want to see how our universities, students can be able to elect their student leaders through a public suffrage, one man, one vote, as it is in the national elections. Kwa nini watu wanapiga kura pale in counties, nationally, wanapigia kila mtu kura yake inahesabiwa? Why do we have our institutions, elections, watu wanapigiwa kura watu fulani, then now watu kidogo, hata kama tuseme University of Nairobi 36 people are elected, and then those 36, they only make a sole decision of who becomes the president. That should not be the case. We have done several petitions. Personally, as Anthony Manyara, I've done 13 petitions in the National Assembly to see how we can be able to overturn that draconian Duale bill, so that we can have the voices of those students count, so that our students, whenever we have band accommodation, when we have school fees is too high, most of us here are parents. Now, even as we speak, the government is proposing very good proposals for education. But who is there to fight for those students? Who is there to fight for them? So those are kind of questions we are supposed to ask. As I conclude, let me say we'll join hands with this team, Elections Observation Group, so that we see how we can be able to join hands. When we petitioned the National Assembly, we were shut down by the Education Committee, not just the National Assembly, but the whole bicameral house. We want to see how the government can be able to listen, so that our institutions can be able to have independent student bodies, which are not, of course, propelled by the administrations, so that our students can be able to get fair services by their representatives. What we have today is that university administrations, they are hand-picking students. They are favorite students. Some even go to an extent of paying those delegates so that they elect their own. Sometimes you can even tell that maybe the niece of a vice chancellor, the nephew of a vice chancellor is elected as the president. Why? Because the vice chancellor himself anatoa pesa, anapea how delegates. Can we agree? We agree, we join hands, right? Sawa sawa. Wacha nimalizie hapo nikisema tuko pamoja. I'm a very calm person, but wakisumbua sana tunafanya demonstration. Hatujachoka. For information, I've conducted demonstrations for very many times, and I'm not tired anyway. Students cannot be puppets. We can never allow them to be puppets. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.
So then I want to then invite Madam Ruth Kulundo, who is the Vice CEO of the IEBC, to come and say a few words. Karibu bwana, Madam Ruth.
The Chief of Party, Madam Susie Ibutu, CEO of ELOG, Mr. Mule Musau, USAID, represented here by Mr. Fred Owegi, and other partners, all protocols observed. Good afternoon. Usually when I go into a meeting, I usually map myself where I belong by looking at the program. And when I looked at today's program, I realized IBC were not on the program. And I wondered aloud. I even told Marcus, hey, we are not on the program. And as the meeting has progressed, I've realized we are supposed to listen as IBC. So many comments have come forward, and I just want to say thank you very much. I received them positively on behalf of the Commission, and we are going to work on them, but others we have already started working on them. So as IBC, I just want to say that we are given the mandate by the Commission, by the Constitution, to facilitate election observation by Article 88, 4H. If we all look at the Constitution. And our work is to ensure that we facilitate observation of the elections, monitoring of the same, and evaluation. And I believe as a commission we have tried to do that. From what Dr. Thomas gave us in the morning, you realize that in 2017 we had 58,000 observers, both local and international. And in 2022 we had 120,731. He got the figures right. And all these have given our operations feedback, as much as he indicated that just a few had done it. But some of them come to us individually and just give us verbal feedback. But of course, it's better when it is written so that it is available to the public. And I would want also to say that ELOG shared with us that their report on from the ballot to the portal. And we have been working on their recommendations, and will endeavor to ensure that we work on all the recommendations they have made. But give me just a chance to respond on a few issues that have been brought forward by the speakers this morning. Starting with Dr. Thomas, I would say that we accredited more observers in 2022 because we had an AMS, accreditation management system, in place. In 2017, we were a bit analog, so we are using hard copies. So it was hard for observers, especially local, to register with us. But in 2022, people are able to register as observers from the comfort of their offices, homes, or wherever they were, even using their mobile phones, and we are getting to them. Unfortunately, it didn't work towards the end, and that's why, as you observed in his presentation, we're actually still giving out the badges up to the last day before the election. But we'll endeavor to ensure that in 2027, that does not happen. If possible, we'll be looking forward to stopping or to putting a deadline at least 30 days before the election day. And of course, there were also other reasons, including the stakeholders' interest in the process in 2022, more than 2017. And that's why the number went up from 58 to 120,000. And of course, again, as he has indicated, we are going to vet and ensure that we get out more professional observers than pop-ups and part-timers. We'll try our level best to do that. Now, coming to also the results, as Dr. Mule put it, or Mr. Mule put it, it will be very hard for us to bar elections or political players from the tallying center unless we put it in law. And remember, they are the same people who are going to pass that law. So it will be very hard. Just the same way we have been struggling on how to put on Campaign Finance Act or bill go through, because they are the same people who will be affected. But we'll try our level best to do that. Again, on engaging the media, we tried our best to do it. Unfortunately, they gave contradicting figures. But we have decided, given your report, ELOG, we have decided that we'll use Media Council of Kenya to collaborate, all the media houses, so that the figures they give the public or the citizens in 2027 are coordinated. They'll come from MCK and not just IBC, MCK, then to the media houses. So we'll ensure that that is collaborated. How about ensuring that all the results are transmitted electronically? The law or the Constitution only provides for presidential. Again, if we have to involve the other 5 positions, it has to go into the law because it's a cost attached to it. And we have to be funded by the government. So again, that will require a lot to be put in. How about the first past the post electoral system, where the winner takes it all? Again, it has to be embedded in the law. So that maybe the law says whoever wins gets 60% and whoever loses gets 40% of the seats, or whatever happens, or the activities in the country. Otherwise, as IBC, our hands are held, our hands are tied. We cannot change that. We'll still maintain that until it comes out very clearly for us to implement. During our presentation at the National Dialogue, we gave that as our proposal, that let us avoid having winner takes it all, because it is even the thing that is affecting our trust levels. I can confirm here that I was a county returning officer before I was elevated to the position which I hold now. And as Malit put it, the expectations of the people of that county were expecting candidate A to win. But actually, when the results came out after the counting, it's candidate B who won. Even myself, as the county returning officer, I was shocked, because whatever was being spoken on the ground, it was candidate A who was meant to win. But it came out as candidate B who won. So for the public, or for Kenyans to help the trust levels of IBC to improve, we need to change the law so that the winner does not take it all. And we'll also endeavor to ensure during our voter education, we lower the expectations of our fellow citizens. Because there's so much expectation out there that whenever now we get to the climax, it's like it becomes anti-climax. And people now start blaming IEBC. Avoiding strangers, again, we'll try through the politicians. We have actually done a lot with JLAC. We have been talking to them so that they also try and help us have the bills that have been pending before the House for so long, like even 4 or 5 years. For example, even the boundary delimitation bill has been pending before the parliamentary House for the last 4 years. And yet we are supposed to conclude this boundary delimitation process by March next year. So we don't know how we are going to carry out this boundary delimitation if the commissioners are going to come on board. So we are looking into it. We have been talking to JLAC, but those of us who are here and are able to help us enhance the process, you are welcome to help us, but we are also trying as IBC. Also, there is this campaign finance. It has been pending before the parliament for the last 4 years, 5 years, even from the previous 2017. We don't know how to go about it, but we are also talking to them. We also presented at the National Dialogue and ensure that this is done as soon as possible. Then coming to Grace Chelagat. Yes, Kalikol, we know it is a very needy area, and the whole of Turkana County. And we are working, actually work with them a lot. The county elections manager there, if you visited his office, he'll tell you we are doing a lot. And we are going to ensure that Turkana and other ASAL, arid and semi-arid lands or places, we are going to reach them. We have mobile registration centers, but unfortunately, due to lack of funds, we are not able to reach everywhere. We are only able to reach where we are able, but that helicopter or that plane they see once in 5 years, they'll be able to see it every time. Now, for Bakari, I'll just pick one. About doing voter education in schools, we have started, and we are working with KICD. We are hoping that it will be incorporated in that citizenship docket so that the students or our pupils are able to be taught. Now, when I come to cross-cutting issues, voter education, which again ELOG emphasized in their report and the recommendations, our hands are tied as IBC. Why? Because we are funded. This is a mandate we are given in the Constitution. So it is supposed to be funded by the government. Unfortunately, they give us money the last year to elections. And that's why you see IBC running all over, yeah? Trying to educate people, trying to get voter educators, voter education providers, using the interior offices to educate people. We have actually suggested to the government that kindly just divide the money with 5 years so that you give us money for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, up to 5, so that by the time we are getting to the 5th year, we are just concluding. But that hasn't happened. In fact, the people who come in to fill the gap are USAID and related partners, yeah, who come in to fill. But the government has been delaying until the last year. But what if they give us the money now, they would actually run with it up to 2027. And again, I would want sincere apologies to Thomas for not having been given information by our office. And we have agreed, we spoke over tea, and we agreed that he'll have the information that is pending before the end of tomorrow. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to say asanteni sana. I decided to do more listening. I had carried a speech, but I decided to do more listening than talking. Asante.
I think Madam Ruth now understands why IBC was not in the program. So then we move now to our chief guest. I would like us to, in a way of stretching, all arise as he comes to the podium. Bwana Sati, please come forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcus. For those who don't know, Marcus was my classmate at the University of Nairobi. And it's not that he was in a school for the deaf, but it was the University of Nairobi. We were together at master's level. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the last week of September is a very special week for all deaf people globally. It's that time that we used to spread a message of what are the barriers, what are the attitudinal barriers and challenges that deaf people face globally. And just to also let the society know that deaf people can always contribute to the nation's upbuilding. So thank you very much. Good to see you. Good to see my two professors also for the same class who are seated somewhere around here. Now, first, before I make my remarks, allow me to start by registering apologies from our Honorable Chair, Madam Florence Kajuju, who is the chair of our commission. She really appreciated the invitation that ELOG sent to the commission, but she's not around because of circumstances beyond our control. She could not be with us today. But then she's given me a message of congratulations to pass to the national coordinator, Mr. Mule, plus your partners, all your partners, for this wonderful launch of Citizen Center Assessment Report. And the commission, we really appreciate you and all your partners for this wonderful job. So thank you very much. Now, some of you perhaps have heard about the Office of the Ombudsman. And I will wish perhaps to just point out that the process of a citizen assessment, citizen-led assessment, is not something new to us as a commission. And this is because we were part, of course, during the data collection period, we were part of this. And that's why receiving this invitation from ELOG was really very important opportunity for us as a commission to come and be part of this. as the Office of the Ombudsman, just like any other sister commissions that are established by the Constitution, but also other legislations, but our place as the Office of the Ombudsman in the electioneering process and period is important. Why? Because we do monitoring as well. That role remains central for us as a commission. As you all know, the Office of the Ombudsman is a public defender. Why? Because the Constitution of Kenya gives us a mandate and a mandate to ensure that the national values and principles of good governance, particularly Article 10 of the Constitution, which speaks loudly about the need for participation of the people. And in that sense, the Office of the Ombudsman, as you all know, looks at everything from the aspect of administrative justices or injustices. And in this, we look whether the processes involved were lawful or procedural. And also beyond that, the Office of the Ombudsman has a second mandate to perhaps examine the extent to which the right to access information was enjoyed during the electioneering period. I've of course heard from Thomas, who made a wonderful presentation, that sometimes seeking information during that period or after that period is difficult. The Office of the Ombudsman has a role to ensure that when the citizenry of this country are looking for that information, the information is shared as it should. So in that respect, the Office of the Ombudsman also is mandated to protect the sovereignty of the people, that is the Kenyans, and of course, secure constitutionalism. And in that sense, and with that clear understanding, that forms the participation of the Office of the Ombudsman in the observing of election. That then is the reason why we are here to share with all of you what were the experiences, what were the gaps that we identified, and what are the recommendations that the Office of the Ombudsman thought should share with all of you here today. Our experience from the election monitoring was, of course, generated from 126 observers that we deployed to the field, both long-term observers and short-term observers. And we were spread through 33 counties throughout Kenya. On the E-Day, we had almost, of course, we were in almost 700 polling stations throughout the country. So this gave us an opportunity to give a position, as I explained earlier, on the monitoring and observing of the elections. During those processes, we were able to look at different stages, like for example, the voter registration. We participated at the two phases of voter registration, so we observed, and I'm happy that I am, as I will share with you quickly later, the findings that ELOG has shared are similar to the findings that we have as a commission. We participated in monitoring and observing the campaigns. Why? Because this is at the heart of our work and our mandate as the Office of the Ombudsman. Why? Because we look at to what extent do public officers, or to what extent are they involved in the campaigning or during the campaigning period, and to what extent this has implication on the service delivery. And this is, of course, a key aspect that is unique or distinguishes our ombudsman from other observers. And on the same note, the Office of the Ombudsman also looked at to what extent were public resources these vehicles, among others, were used during that campaigning period. And when IBC and other relevant agencies, of course, have legal and capacity to ensure that those who are bounded in case they were found, to what extent were they able to do this? We also looked at or observed whether the law or legal provisions and all procedures were followed. So we looked at administrative malpractices during that period. We were also able to monitor the verification of the presidential candidate. And this is because if you look at the ELOG's report, it observed that the issue of trust or mistrust, the percent was, of course, very low, the issue of trust. Issues around integrity. People raised issues around integrity. So we were looking at whether the verification, for instance, meets the threshold as established within the Constitution under the leadership and integrity chapter. Why? Because they will, of course, have an implication of participation or not, citizen not participating during the election at all. Whenever people have integrity questions, those who've been involved in abuse of office, or perhaps denied access to information, among other things. Now, to quickly highlight this, because of course of the issue of time, we of course agreed with ELOG's observation when it pointed out that the issue of voter registration, the voter registration process was not very simple as it should. It was complex. And the citizens experienced a lot of frustrations. Like, for example, in our report, there are good things that we highlighted, like on the issue of voter education. It was done, it was well done, to help people understand when or where to go and do registration. But then, the truth is, many Kenyans were only thinking of the mass registration period, other than knowing that IBC is always open through their offices at the county to be doing registrations. And this, in a way, affected why they could not get or achieve the target that you had put, IBC had put for yourself. There was phase 1 and phase 2, but still the target number was not achieved. We also observed, of course, our mandate around access to information. We were able to assess the extent to which information was shared to the citizens so that they could use this information during that period. Of course, IBC plus other partners plays a very, very important role in this or around sharing of information to the citizen. But we also observed that especially during the mass registration, many people will go, for example, at the registration desk without the proper documentation. Some of them will carry, for example, copies of ID to the registration desks. And for me, or for us, this explained the issue of civic education. Were they taught before on what are the proper documents to carry for registration? Going to perhaps a matter around, or the issue on voter registration transfer, for example, all of you know that it only happens at the county level or at the county offices. Many people did not know this. They will just go at the registration centers scattered around the county, okay? And that might have led to why many people will go to the registration desk and they were told that you need to go to the county headquarters, and some of them will not actually go when we followed up. So, and that might have led to the reason why IBC could not achieve the target that they had put for themselves. And also there were requirements that one had to come with for the information to be transferred. Like, for example, proving your residency of a certain area. So they will tell the citizen, come with the bill, the water bill, or electrical bill, or a letter from the chief to prove where you live. And many people felt they did not have this kind of information. So the question was, do we need to review perhaps these regulations so that we see what are the best ways to facilitate this process without requiring much of these documentations. Of course, we know there's a political angle to this that we all appreciate. There are controls, of course, on why there are regulations, why you will want to do this, but does it have an impact on the registration process at the end? And what are the best ways that you will want to do this so that it does not, of course, affect the registration, the entire registration process? So that is something that IBC will want to think through. When it comes to campaigns, monitoring campaigns, which I have highlighted earlier, we were able to monitor the campaigns period or that phase. And we really want to appreciate IBC for working with the timelines. You really worked within the you adhered to the timelines from the beginning to the end. To that, we really appreciate. There were few maladministration issues that we could note. Like, for example, the advertisements, especially the incumbency, they will advertise using the public resources, or they will campaign using public resources. The current office holders will take opportunity of using the resources that they have. Sometimes they will hide behind launching projects, but then they will call media and social media in the launching of the project, which in a way they were still campaigning. Launching of different programs, for instance. They will put on social media, we were able to do this, they will put on first or second page of newspaper to show that, of course, there is this project that they're going to launch, but in real sense, what they were doing was a campaign. It was a campaign strategy for them. And more fundamentally, we observed that many public officers were part of the teams that were campaigning around the country. And you know how controversial that was, or how that became. And I'm happy that the current regime has actually appreciated that. And perhaps they need to see, not from the general perspective, but perhaps are there legislation amendments that should be done? Because of course the laws are there, or on how far the CSS, for instance, can participate. And the civil servants are actually not even allowed to participate. There are clear legislations around this, but then what is it that we can make sure we are able to do so that we can minimize this? So that we avoid the issue of people having expectation that candidate A will win, and then at the end candidate B wins, and then now it brings all the emotions that we could experience. But from the citizenry perspective, it affected the level of service delivery. You can imagine, for example, when a CS or a PS are away from the office for almost weeks or months, then what happens in their office on issues of approvals, among other things? There's a serious implication of service delivery within their ministries. So one of the recommendations that we strongly made, was to have legislations around this. As I explained earlier, if you look at Section 14 of the Elections Offences Act, it of course allows IBC to work with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, that the DPP, to impound, for example, a vehicle that is used by a public officer in campaigning. But this did not happen at all. How can we ensure that IBC is empowered to make sure that this happens during the campaigns period? That is a recommendation that we made. We also made a recommendation on the need to empower the citizens themselves to report any incidences or abuse of office and abuse of power during the campaign period. I noted from the ELOG's report, or from the report that was shared, there were highlights of disputes during elections. There were dispute resolutions, but then many people were not aware of this. The citizens actually did not know if, for example, there was malpractice. Very few know what malpractices are and where and what to when and where to report to. What are the relevant bodies? Of course, the IBC and relevant actors need to make sure that people are sensitized on this area so that they know how to report and what to report and where to report. That will really enhance the issue of trust that came out clearly from your report. I don't want to put more emphasis on our observations during the E-Day, but then, like your report or ELOG's report came out, the issue of SIG's representation, that is very true. We appreciate that IBC allowed, like for example, political party agents and representatives to be around and even support. But then it caused crowding, a lot of crowding at the polling centers, which sometimes then the issue of privacy and secrecy of voting was lost for persons who are persons with disability, uneducated, illiterate people, or elderly. Why? Because like 5-6 people were surrounding this person to help them voting, so the issue of secrecy was lost. How do we ensure that this can be improved in the future? We share the same observation around media reporting, because there are different numbers being thrown about. And we made a recommendation on the same. But also from the Ombudsman's perspective, we looked at the issues of administrative injustices or justices. Like, for example, postponing the elections of Kakamega and Mombasa. What did that mean to everyone, to the citizens? So we were able to explain this, the issues of course, the logistical issues around all these, the omissions around all this, but then they were able, IBC was able to explain this to us, but then what did this mean to the citizens of that country? Is it something of that county? This is something that honestly we felt should not really be repeated. We share the same thoughts around elections, legal and policy frameworks, which of course came out very well from the ELOG's report. Like, for example, Section 44 of the Elections Act that allows the IBC to deploy technology as might be necessary when circumstances rise. Yes, this we understand. But then we thought it will be nice if we can have a process-oriented regulation. Why? Because the decision of, let's say, changing from manual to the use of automating the process was made at the last minute. This affected a lot of the process. We strongly recommended that also IBC should implement Section 14 of the implement Section 14 and 15 of the Elections Act, particularly on public officers participating on the elections and abuse of office. The Office of the Ombudsman is happy to work with IBC and ODPP and other relevant stakeholders to ensure that this does not happen again or at all. We recommended that the ODPP should provide IBC with information about or around the status of pending or cases that have not been prosecuted or have been prosecuted, to allow IBC to enforce the election code of conduct. And this is because many of the times that any person will just come up and seek for a seat, but then how do we make sure that we're able to control this? If that information is shared to IBC, then we are able to get leaders that can help in developing this nation, but also the issues of integrity are upheld to the end or to the later. We also recommended that there should be clearances from different institutions and agencies. This is not easy, I must say, but then we need to have a clear framework. Like, for example, the Office of the Ombudsman can clear someone looking from the aspect of a public office. They have been holding public office, for instance. Was there any report of abuse of power on them? Access to information that was denied, were they declared unfit to hold a public office? So, and that is within our CAJ Act and our regulation that gives us power to declare a public officer unfit to hold a certain public office. Now, if we clear them, how can we make sure that that information is used by IBC to make sure that they're able to do the same from their end? That will, of course, contribute to a level of trust for the election process. But more fundamentally, like the Deputy CEO said, I agree with what she said on the issue of adequate and, of course, timely funding to make sure that the IBC has proper funding of the entire process. It brought about serious implication on management of the election. And it's a strong recommendation that we made because that will really help them or help IBC carry out a proper election. So those are some of the observations that we made as the Office of the Ombudsman that I've quickly jogged through. I'm remaining with 1 minute. I can see on the time I'm remaining with only a minute. However, from the Ombudsman's perspective, like I said earlier, our aspiration or desire is to see that the subsequent elections, of course, actually even during the elections, there might have been some omissions here and there, but then all the elections was within the general, all the laws and procedures. That we were able to make that recommendation. And the report that is being launched today, of course, I believe that this can be used to generate more conversation and debate that will, of course, inform the national dialogue, for instance, platform, because we want to bring the citizens' point of view as well, so that we appreciate what it is that we define as democracy here in Kenya. And the report that have been launched by different institutions, different entities, when it's put together with the ELOG's report, then it can generate this conversation so that the process should not be driven by just other actors, but citizens-driven process, so that we minimize the expectations, and of course we have a fair and free election in this country. With that, thank you very much, Marcus.
So then we move now to the unveiling of our report. And so to this extent, I would like to invite our teams, led by Brenda Shirley, to take us through the procedure, so how we unveil this report. So Brenda, would you please come forward?
Thank you all for joining us today. We have reached the moment we've all been waiting for, to unveil this report that has been worked on by everyone in this room and also the citizens. So I'd like to invite the ELOG leadership, that's the steering committee members, the APP, the speakers, to join us up front. Thomas, kindly, Grace.
You'll be given instructions.
Everyone have a book? Okay. Marcus. Move. Okay, so we want to unveil mhm. 5, 4, 3, 1. Thank you. So we shall move to the left so we can take a picture.
Could we move to the ELOG banner, please?
Okay.
With the book?
With the books?
I would like to invite Bwana Eric, who is the chairperson of United Disabled Persons of Kenya and a member of ELOG Advisory and Peace Panel, to officially give a vote of thanks and close the meeting. Bwana Eric, karibu.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Ngondi from the United Disabled Persons of Kenya, UDPK, which is an umbrella body of organizations of persons with disability. And I thank you, Marcus, for the opportunity of moving a vote of thanks. And before I even start, I want to say this, believe you me, for sure, 100%, I have the best intention of saying thank you to each and every one of you. However, in case I don't, we can also have Vile Munani Cheki on me, yeah? And that's why today we have such a very, we've launched such a very important report so that we continuously improve on what we are doing as duty bearers, as CSOs, as NGOs, and as a private sector. And so before, let me start by first thanking our funders, our supporters, our donors today for this report, USAID through Mr. Fred Owaga. And we want to sincerely thank you as ELOG, and in the same light, thank all the other funders or donors or supporters that may be here that I may not be able to mention by name right now. And two, excuse me, let me go to all those. Next, actually, let me thank and sincerely thank the ELOG fraternity. Starting by, of course, the Peace Panel, the National Steering Committee, and all staff of ELOG through the leadership of Mr. Mule, who gave us a very insightful on how things are on the ground. Kama vile husema vile mambo iko kwa ground. And so we sincerely thank you, the fraternity of ELOG. And I also now want to go into thanking each and every one of us who's shared this podium with Mr. Marcus. And of course, Mr. Marcus will be the last one. Let me start by our chief guest today, Bwana Sati. And first, wish you a happy International Day of the International Week of the Deaf. I don't know what sign we can do for that, there is for that, but I want to sincerely wish you a happy International Week of the Deaf. And in the same light, thank our aides, our supporters. First, the sign language interpreter there. I've not got the name, but we sincerely thank you for the good job. And in the same light, I also thank Peter, my aide, my guide, my support. Thank you very much. And now, next, Madam Ruth Kulundu, the vice chair, the vice CEO of IEBC. I was very inspired by what you said, and most importantly, I'm encouraged by your courage to be here. I mean, IEBC is most of the time on the receiving end. I don't know if there's any day I've been in an event and it's not on the receiving end. So I want to sincerely thank you and tell you that we appreciate the work you're doing. And of course, through this report, you can very much improve. And of course, you always know that if you do not improve, the sword of Damocles is always hanging on the head or above your head, as the Greek mythology goes. Then I want to thank Mr. Anthony, who spoke here, and he said he is the East Africa president. Please don't call the comrades in case I don't get the full title, but he's the East Africa president of the universities and TVETs. I was encouraged by what you said and also inspired. And at one point when you finished your speech, I was almost standing up to a rallying call of comrades power. You know. So thank you very much. And then there was Bwana Baraka, Bakari from Mombasa. And we thank you, Sana, for your message and coming all the way to share with us your message. Reverend Grace, you took the podium also here. And I want to also thank you in person for what you shared with us, because that's really what's happening on the ground. And I think this report will go a long way into providing insights into what can be done to improve the situation on the ground. Then there was Madam Monica, what you shared with us, and we appreciate. Finally, if my memory does not fail me, I want to give a hearty thanks to our chief of staff, for sharing with us and welcoming us and making us feel at home earlier in the morning. So I want to thank you and appreciate you and say thank you for all you've done for us, of course, even through the fraternity of ELOG. Now, I also want to thank all the others that have not mentioned in person, starting from the Fourth Estate, our social media team, and all other people who are here very early in the morning, faced and braced the traffic jam in Nairobi and called. I know you could have been maybe in other places. You probably have other important things that you could have been doing, but you've been here with us. You've spent already over 5 hours with us here, and I want to sincerely thank and appreciate you. And as I said, the last to appreciate, but not the least, is our able MC, Mr. Marcus. So maybe we can give him a hearty clap. So we want to thank you for the amazing job you've done. You make it feel so easy to stand in front of the people here. You are very natural at it, and so we want to thank you. And at the same time, we give ourselves a hearty clap for being here, for participating, and for enjoying the opportunity of ELOG fraternity. Thank you very much.